All right, Joel, so we are finishing up the rest of Daf Tzadik Aleph, and we are picking up in Meretz Hashem on the second wide line of Tzadik Aleph from base 91b. Remember, again, the Gemara is trying to figure out who is the opinion who holds that halacha l'maisa, a person is permitted to go ahead and cause physical harm, physical damage to themselves. So, excuse me. So the Gemara wanted to suggest that Allah Chalamais is Rabbi Lazar, because Rabbi Lazar said if a person does kriya, a person tears their clothing in mourning for the dead, so if he does the right amount, then that's talocha. If he tears excessively, then ultimately, again, that's bal tashchis. So if there's a concept of bal tashchis, if there's a prohibition to go out and destroy one's clothing, then alachas kama v'kama, all the more so there should be a prohibition to go ahead and destroy or physically harm one's body. To which the Gemara says, "V'dilma begadim shiny." Second line above, the second wide line. Maybe clothing is different. Dipsida de lo haderu, because ultimately, again, the destruction of clothing is a loss which doesn't regenerate. It doesn't recover. Ki had Rabbi Yochanan himself kari lamanai mach bedusa. Rabbi Yochanan used to call his clothing machbadusa. Machbadusa, Rashi points out over here, are the things that give me kavod. Things that give me kavod. You know, it's the clothes make the man. We have this concept by the Big Day Kahuna. The Sefer HaChinuch brings down that's one of the profound reasons why the Kohanim have unique begadim, unique clothing that they have to wear during the Avodah. So number one is for the rest of us who come to the Beis HaMikdash that we should be inspired. We see a chashivas, an importance, but also for the Kohanim themselves, that a person who's dressed in a certain way feels differently about themselves. We know this. A day that I'm walking around in sweatpants and a t-shirt, I feel one way. A day that I'm dressed up, I look like a mensch. I mean, not the sweatpants and t-shirt. You don't look like a mensch. But I'm a little bit more dressed up and I'm a little bit more put together. I feel differently about myself. So we know Rabbi Yochanan called his clothing his machbedusa, his forms of kavod. Rav Chisda kat have a maski bene hizmi vehigi madli lehulamani. Rav Chisda used to walk around thorn bushes. He would lift up his tunic. Why? Amar zeh ma'ala aruka v'zeh eino ma'ala aruka. He would say, if my clothing gets cut, right, gets torn by the thorns, it's not going to regenerate, right? But if my skin gets cut, then Emirat Hashem, my skin will go ahead and regenerate. So the point over here is you see that it could very well be, as interesting as this is, it could very well be that maybe the destruction of clothing, right, is actually more severe than destruction or visiting physical harm upon oneself. Because clothing ultimately doesn't regenerate, but physical harm can. Ela haitan, rather it's the following Tana. The Sanyo, Amr Belazar, Hakafar Barabi, Matamalom Revichiper Me'Allah Me'asher Chata Ala Nefesh. So remember again, the Torah is talking about over here by the Nazir. At the end of the Nazir's process, so the Torah says, "Va'asa koin echad lechatas v'echad leola, v'chiper alav me'asher chata al hanefesh v'kidesh rosho bayomahu." So again, specifically talking about a Nazir who had a tumah exposure and has to start again, but the Torah uses the lashon that he will find atonement because he sinned regarding the nefesh. So the Gemara says, "V'chibe ezen nefesh chata zeh." I understand, what did the Nazir do wrong? Ela shetzir atzmo min hayayin. So what's the Nazir's sin? Is incredible. The Nazir's sin ultimately, again, is that he abstained from wine. In other words, he afflicted himself by not partaking of wine. If a person who just abstains from wine is called a sinner, so one who goes ahead and is mitzar atzmo, one who goes ahead and causes himself additional pain, certainly is called a sinner as well. And I will say that seems to be how the Gemara ends off by telling us that chovel ba'atzmo, one is not permitted to go ahead and injure themselves. So not only is there not liability for injuring yourself, but, or I should say, even though there is no liability for injuring yourself, nevertheless, halacha l'maisa, one is not permitted to visit physical harm or physical damage upon themselves. Incredible. So the Gemara quotes the Mishnah, quotates nitiosav. So remember again, the Mishnah gave another example, that if I go and I cut down, I uproot my own saplings, I'm entitled to do that, so to speak. I'm allowed to do that. But yet, and I'm not obviously liable damages to myself. Yet someone else is not allowed to do that. So the Gemara says, Tani Rav Abrachana Kamei Rav. So the Gemara says, Shori harakta nitiosi katzatsta. Ato. Right? So I'm sorry, kotzatzta. So what happens? So I'll say, so I go over to Reuven. I say, Reuven, you killed my shar, you uprooted my saplings. And Reuven says to me, Ata amartali lahargo, ata amartali lakotzit. So Reuven says back, yeah, I did it, but you told me to do it. You told me to kill the ox, you told me to uproot the saplings. So what's the halacha? Potter. Ultimately, the halacha is Reuven's potter. So Amar lei. So Rav said back to Rabbi Arachana, Imkein lo shavkas chaye libriyasa kol kamine. So I don't understand. Really, that's the way it could work. So that means any single time someone does damage, so the perpetrator could turn around to the victim and say, "Yeah, I damaged you. You told me to do it. You told me to kill your shar. You told me to uproot your saplings. If that's the case, again, how do you ever have a system of damages which are going to be collectible? Amar le yisaime. So Rabbi Bar Chana said, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to erase the teaching? Amar le lo. Rather, what? Titargim masnisoch b'shar omi laharigo b'ilana omi l'ktzitza. Say that case, we'll say, is talking about a shar that is supposed to be put to death. Like, let's say, for example, my shar killed someone. So now again, or for that matter, again, I have a tree which was worshipped as avodah zara. So both of those things are omeid, they are ready to be destroyed. So the case in question over here is, I say to Reuven, you killed my shar. Reuven, you uprooted my sapling. And Reuven said, yeah, I did it. But at the end of the day, the shar was supposed to be put to death, and the sapling or the tree was supposed to be destroyed. So that's why Reuven is pater, because the truth is, he killed the shar that was already subject to death. He uprooted a tree that ultimately had to be destroyed. So in reality, Reuven didn't damage. I, says the Gemara, ihachi, my katoinle. So that's a good point. If that's the case, what's my claim against Reuven? Right? What claim do I have against Reuven if at the end of the day the shar was supposed to be put to death or the tree was supposed to be destroyed? So my claim, this is actually interesting, my claim to Reuven is, it's true you did it, and I understand you're not chayiv damages, but you took away my mitzvah. In other words, it was my mitzvah to make sure the shar is killed. It's my mitzvah to destroy the tree, and you robbed me of a mitzvah. So interesting, the Gemara says, "Desanyo v'shafach v'kisa." The pasuk says by shchita, right? We know if you shech the chaya, non-domesticated animal, the halacha is you have kisa adam, you have to cover the blood. So the Torah juxtaposes v'shafach v'kisa. Shecht, literally spill the blood and cover it. Misha shafach yichasa. The person who does the shchita has the right to the mitzvah of kisui hadam. There was once a story of a guy who shechted and then someone else came along and performed the mitzvah of kisui hadam. And Rabbi Gamliel obligated the guy who did the kisui, who did the covering of the blood, to pay the shechter, to pay the shochet, ultimately 10 gold pieces. So there's a concept in halacha of paying asara zehuvim, and that concept ultimately is related to the idea that when you deprive someone of a mitzvah, there's almost like an element of damages in that. So in this case over here, the shochet checked the animal, he was ready to do the kisui, someone else swooped in and did it. So the guy who did it deprived the shochet ultimately of this particular mitzvah. So Rabbi Gamliel made the guy pay 10 zehuvim. So therefore the Gemara says over here, even in this case, I say, Reuven, you killed my cat, you killed my ox, you cut down my tree. Reuven said, yeah, I did it. Your ox is chayiv misa, your tree is avodah zara, and it has to be destroyed. So again, it was going to be destroyed anyway. And I say, that's true, but lamaisa, it was my opportunity. It's my mitzvah. And therefore, again, the Gemara is suggesting that in these kind of cases, halacha lamaisa, ultimately, again, you'd be pater. Because now what's interesting in these particular cases, why ultimately, again, would you be pater? So it seems to be what the Gemara is saying over here is that there's a distinction between a mitzvah saseh, like kisui hadam, covering the blood, versus the removal of something that is supposed to be destroyed, like the shar that kills someone, or the tree of avodah zara. So it seems to be, even though it is my obligation, so to speak, to make sure the shar is executed, or to go ahead and destroy the avodah zara, halacha l'maisa, if somebody took that opportunity, they're not chayiv to me. Masha enkein, if I had a positive mitzvah that's upon me, and someone else came in and took that mitzvah, there would be financial liability, so to speak, because they deprived me of the mitzvah. There's a excuse me, a beautiful musahaskil in this as well. The beautiful musahaskil is like to get to the level where if you are deprived of doing a mitzvah, you feel a loss. Right? If we're honest, sometimes if I have an obligation and the truth is someone else comes along and does it or takes care of it, maybe there's even a certain, a little bit of relief. You know, it's not on me. I don't have to worry about it. I don't have to do it. There's such a beautiful level of feeling not that mitzvos are this awesome responsibility that sits on my shoulders, or not something that I have to do, but something ultimately that I want to do. And that manifests itself in if you lose the opportunity to do it, I feel a real loss. Can you imagine, Chavra, like getting to that level where, I miss a minyan and I feel a loss. I miss a shir and I feel the loss. I have an opportunity for tzedakah and then the need is taken care of. I feel a loss. to recognize that mitzvahs are the most beautiful and magnificent opportunities that Choshen Baruch Hu gives us day in and day out. And when they present themselves, that's why Chazal say, mitzvah habali yadecha atach nitzena. If the opportunity for a mitzvah comes your way, don't let it become chametz. Don't let it sit. Chatof yachol, grab it. Grab it. Grab life's opportunities because they're fleeting. And if you miss out on the opportunity to do something beautiful, chaval, what a loss. What a loss. And a loss that halacha recognizes to the point that if someone else takes my opportunity, there could actually be financial liability upon that individual. Incredible Gemara. Let's go weiter. Amar Rav. So Rav said as follows. Dikla diton kaba asr lemiktzitze. If you have a palm tree that produces a kav of dates, halach l'maisa, one is not permitted to go out and cut it down. I will say, now, the logic over here, this is a continuation of the Bal Tashchis discussion, because if the tree is producing some amount of dates, halach l'maisa, you can't cut it down. The Gemara says, Meisvei, kama yehe bezayis velo yikotzitzu. So the Gemara says, how much does an olive tree have to produce in order for there to be a prohibition of Bal Tashchis? So Rova, so the Gemara says, a quarter of a kav. A quarter of a kav. So now the shaila is, I understand, an olive tree has to only produce a quarter of a kav, and the palm tree has to produce an entire kav. Why the distinction? To which the Gemara says, shiny zeis and chashivi. Olives are different. Why are olives different? Because they're chashiv. So, sorry. So therefore, even a tree, even an olive tree that only produces a quarter kav, ultimately is chashiv. And therefore you can't destroy it. Dates, right? Dates which are less chashiv, only if the tree produces a kav, ultimately, is there an issue about tashas? Lo shachiv shivchas beri ela dekatz te'inasa below zimna. So this is a pretty profound Gemara. So you have Rabbi Chanina saying, my son Shivchas died, right? Ultimately, the only reason he died is because he cut down a tree. Ultimately, again, before it was supposed to be cut down. If you take a look, no Rashi yet. Sorry. So I will say a very profound idea over here. So what it sounds like is happening over here is Rabbi Chanina is bringing an example of the profundity of going ahead and destroying fruit trees. So he attributes the death of his son ultimately to the fact that his son destroyed a fruit tree which was producing fruit. Very overwhelming. Amar Ravina. Excuse me. Mutter. I will say now, here's what's interesting. The concept of Bal Tashchis represents wanton destruction, wanton unnecessary destruction. So there's an interesting case here. Let's say you have a fruit tree, but the wood of the tree is worth more than the fruit itself. In that case, you're allowed to quote-unquote destroy the tree, cut down the tree, because it's not considered wasteful. It's not considered wanton destruction. I want the wood because the wood is more valuable than the fruit itself. So that's going to be permitted. Ravina, Vimhaimu Lubadamim, Mutter. Taina Me'achabai, that supports this. Rak eitz asher teida. Rak eitz asher teida. So we'll say, so the pasuk that the Gemara is talking over here, Rak eitz asher teida, ki lo eitz ma'achalhu, also tashchis. Remember again, the Isra Bal Tashchis only applies to fruit-bearing trees. If it's not fruit-bearing, then halacha l'mais you're allowed to destroy it. So the Gemara says, so Rak eitz ma'achal asher teida ze ilan. Ze ilan ma'achal. This refers to a tree that produces fruit or food. So the Gemara says, ki lo eitz ma'achalhu. If you know that it's not a tree that produces fruit, ze ilan srak. That refers to a tree that doesn't produce fruit. Now, since at the end of the day, ultimately, again, the Torah includes everything, right? So remember again, halacha l'maisa, that remember you are. The Torah says, "Rak eitz asher teida kilo eitz ma'achahu osa tashchis v'karasa ubanisa matzor ala'ir asher hiyose imcha milchama ad v'ritzas." Remember again. The only prohibition to destroy fruit trees is when you don't need to destroy them. If you need to destroy them for military purposes, you're permitted to destroy everything. So the Gemara says, after the Torah is going to include everything, meaning that if there's a need, you could even cut down fruit trees. So ma tamulomar kilo eitz ma'achal. Ultimately, again, so why does the Torah go ahead and add in the phrase kilo eitz ma'achal? Lahaktim srak lemachal. So this is very interesting. Halacha l'maisa. So the Torah does it in order to go ahead and what? In order to provide kedimos, precedence, ultimately, again, to the non-fruit tree, ultimately over the fruit tree. In other words, what does this mean? If halacha l'maisa, so Rashi points out over here, if halacha l'maisa, there's a difference, or you have the choice between cutting down a fruit tree. Let's say you have to cut down a tree, and there are two trees in front. You only need to cut down one, whatever the Metzias is. You only need to cut down one. And in front of you, there's a fruit tree and a non-fruit tree. So which one should you cut down? The Ilan Srak. You should cut down the non-fruit tree. Tzadik Beis Amud Aleph 92a. Says the Imar, Yachal afilu mu'ula b'damim. You might have thought that halacha l'maisa, that maybe that the non-fruit tree, takes precedence ultimately over the fruit tree. Even if halacha l'maisa, the fruit tree is more valuable as wood than it is as a fruit tree. Talmud lomar rak. Therefore, the pasuk says rak. So it should come out with here something really very interesting. So halacha l'maisa, there's an issue about tashchis. That's number one, right? So about tashchis says any wanton, unnecessary destruction. That being said, if halacha l'maisa, you need to destroy the trees for the sake of the war effort, you're allowed to do so. What the Torah is telling me is, if I only have to destroy one tree, and it's a choice between a fruit-bearing tree or a non-fruit-bearing tree, destroy the non-fruit-bearing tree. However, if the fruit-bearing tree is more valuable as wood than it is as a fruit-bearing tree, then you're allowed to cut down that tree to use the wood. Okay, Shmuel Aisi le Arise Tamri. So what happened? So Shmuel had a sharecropper, and the sharecropper, remember again, sharecropper shares in the bounty of the field. He gets some percentage. So Shmuel sharecropper brought him dates. So Achol Taim Buhu Taim Dechamra. So Shmuel ate the dates, and it's interesting. In the date itself, he tasted it like a little bit of wine. Amrle my high. So he said to the sharecropper, "What's going on over here? Why do I taste wine in the dates?" Amrle Beni Gufne Kaimi. He said, because ultimately, again, the date palms, are planted amongst the vines. So apparently, again, they were absorbing some of the flavor. Amar Mechachashi Bechamra Kulehai. So ultimately, again, so he said, Lamachar, I see the Mikaraihu. Ultimately, again, he said, so literally Shmuel said, Lamaisa, they go ahead and they have such an impact on the wine, right? They have such an impact on the wine. He said, tomorrow, bring me their roots. Tomorrow, bring in their roots. So take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Rashi says over here, Mikaraihu, Mikar Shalahan ve'ikran, Lashon Acher, Havali Kor Shurach Lechal, the Gadol Saviv Shrashav, Kolomar, Kala Ikara Mipnei Shemafsid V'nechal Asakar. So essentially what Shmuel was saying is that obviously if the dates are absorbing the flavor, it must be that the possibility is that they're diminishing ultimately again the wine. So he said uproot the roots, right? So go ahead and, in other words, what he's saying over here is uproot the date palms, right? Uproot the palm trees so that the palm trees no longer have a negative impact upon the roots. Rav Chisda chaza ta'ali begufna. So Rav Chisda once saw again young palm trees that were all again growing amongst the vines. So what happens? Amar li Lari, he said to his sharecropper, Akrinhu, go ahead and uproot the trees. Gufni kani dikli lo kani gufni. He says why? Because ultimately again vines, apparently again if there's like a tension between the vine and the date palm, so the vine has the ability to coexist with the date palm, but ultimately again the date palm cannot go ahead and coexist with the vine. Take a look at Rashi. Gufna kani dikli. So what happens? Midmei hayayin yecholin elo liknos karkaos vilo dikli lo kani gufni ein shavachan ola ela ledavar muat. So again, it's interesting. So essentially, he said like this. He said that halacha l'maisa. Excuse me. He said vines in general produce grapes, and grapes have a greater value. So we want to do everything to make sure that the vines are vibrant and healthy. So uproot the palm trees. Because why? This way, again, halacha l'maisa, you could go ahead and sell the wine, and you could always go ahead and buy dates with the proceeds of the wine. Conversely, dates are not as valuable. So if you're going to diminish the vines, ultimately, again, it's taking a greater financial loss. All right. Incredible. I'll say good. So now we are all caught up in Meretz Hashem tomorrow. We will start tomorrow, Friday morning. We will start in Meretz Hashem at the Mishnah on Tzadik Beis Amud Aleph. Tremendous shkayach, everyone. Really looking forward. Incredible daf tomorrow. Shkayach and a good Erev Shabbos.